and welcome in to Catch the Wave DNVR show on the Colorado Rapids as we follow the team through their run in the MLS Cup. Not so much, but that's okay. We're still here. We were never going to make this a one and done type of deal. I am still joined by two very special guests, two people I'm pretty hyped to get into all this Rapids season, MLS playoffs, and much more. Once again, joined by Matt Pollard, host of Holding the Highline podcast, Rapids beat reporter. Find him at LWOS Matt Pollard on Twitter. Matt does a ton of stuff, so you better stay on top of it all. And also a new guest today with us, Jared Geisler, host of the phenomenal Centennial 38 podcast with Wanners, our guest last week. And check out C38 and all the great stuff the Rapids supporter group does on Twitter at C38SG. Fellas, how are you today?
I've recovered from Thanksgiving from a weight standpoint and everything. Obviously getting into it's still, I don't know about you guys, but I'm still bothered we haven't gotten a significant amount of snow and we're into December now. So doing okay, obviously, Dre. Happy to be back on here. Thanks to DNVR Sports for making it happen. Disappointed, obviously, given the circumstances. Massive
shame. But yeah, glad we could do this all together. Jared, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. It took a week to kind of get over it, and I think I'm there because you talked about an MLS Cup run. I think I made more runs in the turkey line than the Rapids did at goal on Thursday. So it was very disappointing. We all wanted to be on this show, getting very hyped for the Western Conference Final, but not to be.
Unfortunately, not. And yeah, let's get into it. What went down in that game? And I want to start with, what would you guys say was really the turning point in what ended up being a very disappointing 1-0 loss to the Timbers? The game kind of going mad in the final, on the 90th minute on, with the Timbers going up. Red card, just complete insanity. But where did this game really turn when I would say the Rapids completely dominated the first 35? I think I don't remember the Timbers really entering the PID's penalty box till about the 35th minute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we felt pretty safe in the first half. Unfortunately, this has been something that a number of times the Rapids have done this year is we've controlled the game. We've had the lion's share of possession, but we unfortunately can't find a turning point. We don't necessarily know where the focal point of the attack is and haven't really all season long. So this game was a microcosm of something that's happened a number of times in some games where we should have won and drew, or we were unable to find a winner and eventually drop points. But for me, the turning point really was the goal in the 90th minute, because we just didn't find a way to create a turning point in our favor at any point prior. A couple of opportunities, but really all too few threats on goal.
I don't know. There was a specific moment for me, Dre. I would say as soon as that really good, the Rapids come out, they have a really good start and everything. Yeah. I asked Robin Fraser about it in the post-game media availability about a question of, was this going to be a case of rest versus rust? Mm-hmm. I thought the team came out, they were very intense. The week that they had to prep was very good. And, I thought that any concern about nerves or not being confident, the crowd saw through to that. Yeah. But as soon as that pressure of the opening 5 minutes, the header from Austin Trusty, the chance for Cole Bassett, as soon as that pressure didn't lead to either a change that Portland had to do in their approach or didn't lead to a goal, you've seen in these situations, whether it's games in Europe, Jared, we've talked about this ad nauseum with CONCACAF World Cup qualifying, where the U.S. is at home, they're absolutely blitzing an opponent, and it's just a matter of getting that one extra chance and then really punishing them, and that completely changes the game state. As soon as Portland was able to survive that, they got their head a little bit above water and everything. I think the Rapids' intensity dropped after that 35th minute. It continued to kind of drop through the second half. So I guess if I had to pick a moment, I would say it was the best opportunity the Rapids had. 38th minute, the header from Baji off the play from from Acosta. As soon as that didn't go in,
Yep.
I think at that point that was the Rapids' best chance. And I think as soon as Portland was able to survive that, they were able to get their foot in the door and then gradually, nuzzle out the Rapids to the line for the second helpings for Turkey.
What you're saying to me is akin to we sometimes in fight sports we'll talk about you never know how good a guy is until he takes a punch. And that was kind of the Rapids dominating, and it wasn't even taking a punch, it was seeing their opponent withstand some of their best punches.
Yeah.
And you start to lose confidence, and they start to build off that, right? And the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Confidence swayed.
The Portland Timbers, they are a team built for knockout rounds and everything. If there was an MLS team that I think would be perfectly fit for Jose Mourinho, dare I say it would be the Portland Timbers in terms of single game handling that, and whether it's Lars Mabiala, whether it's Diego Chara, in terms of what he did as a holding midfielder.
Right.
What I thought should have been a penalty in the 22nd minute, notwithstanding, and everything. This is if you want to talk about a team that made the playoffs, that was going to be on the road in the second round, that had the opposite. I don't know. I'm not much of a fight sport guy, so what's the opposite of a glass jaw? That would be the Portland Timbers.
Right.
And in that, while I agree with, and we'll get into this in a bit, where I thought the lineup and the decisions that Robin Fraser made to start the game were right and everything, the way that everything's played out, the one opponent you wouldn't have wanted to play in that second half scenario would have been the Portland Timbers. And, Portland survived. They were going to lose on the cards no matter what, and then they knocked the Rapids out in the final second.
And we've bemoaned that really a number of times, different opponents, but the same story all season long. When teams do sit deep in a deep block of 8 players in the box, the Rapids have had a struggle in unlocking the door. Yeah. Unfortunately, it felt to me like we went to the cross all too often. Yeah. We didn't have a very tall attack, especially in the second half, as we made changes and went to a little bit smaller front line. We just kept searching over the top, allowing Portland to be comfortable, and ultimately, I think that's what did us in.
Right, and to a certain point, that massive advantage for the Rapids down the wings, after a while, the Timbers were just like, okay, go ahead. We'll take another cross into no one once you took Baji and Bassett and all the height that kind of that front had. It was really just crosses to nowhere.
Yeah, I think if we just look at the subs, I think other than Eunice Nomley, I might be taller than every single one of the subs, and I'm 5'6", viewers, in case you were wondering, and everything. I am not very good, in case you were wondering, Andre, when it comes to, I'm not your target number 9. I'm not good on, normally I'm the guy who gets asked to step back at midfield on corners because of how useless I am in the air. But
Barrios would ask to stand in front of you at a concert.
Yes, Barros.
Yeah. So that's the level of height we had in the box. And that's when the crosses even found their way into a scoreable opportunity. A number of them were errant to the point where you almost questioned if we realized the magnitude of the game. It felt that, in a game where you absolutely have to win, you spend that last second of thought on exactly where you want to place the ball. In a game where you feel like you're supposed to win, you just keep putting them in there and one will eventually go home. Well, it just never really found a well-placed ball into the middle. And I don't know how many times we went to the well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would that was such a key to the game for me, was you're going to have to capitalize on some early chances, and they just weren't able to. I'll go with the unconventional turning point. You never would have thought it in the moment, but I thought in a lot of ways Sebastian Blanco's injury gave them more structure, gave them a little more confidence. All of a sudden, they played a little more freely without the ball, Portland did. And it plays into what you said. Like, it probably would have happened naturally even without Blanco getting hurt, that they're just building confidence. Okay, we withstood your best punch. Okay, we withstood your best counter punch. We're starting to feel pretty good about ourselves. We can hang, I also think Blanco kind of loosened up their plan. All of a sudden, we're not trying to play through a number 10. We're just trying to press. The counter started opening up a little more, and I think they found a little more of an identity and structure as just like, we're an underdog. We're going to have to work high rate here. and kind of match the Rapids' intensity. And I thought that happened a little more after the injury.
I think it put a lot more impetus on them to share the ball and everything.
Absolutely.
So Yumi Chara and then Dairon Asprilla. So rather than where I think the Rapids pretty clearly, if we look at what a Jack Price, what a Kellen Acosta was doing defensively, certainly the center backs, it's, there's a turnover and everything. Where's Blanco? Somebody go get Blanco. Somebody else put pressure on the ball and everything. But when that doesn't happen, it's okay, well, who's the most obvious outlet there? And that made it easier. I wouldn't say that I guess where I would disagree, Dre, or where I would say that there's nuance there is I don't think it made it easier for them to attack, but it made it easier for them to just hold the ball and get forward and relieve more of that pressure. Exactly. And that just, whether that, reduced the number of runs or mental intensity that Laris Mabiala had to think about or anything, or it's, okay, let's reset, jog forward, catch my breath. Where's Barros? Where's Acosta? Let's deal with that. I think that allowed them, and it just again, I don't know that it didn't pull the Timbers out of the pool. It didn't give them a life raft, but it allowed them to get their head above water, get another sip and everything, and they just kept treading water until finally they I'm not going to say drown the Rapids. I don't know. I'm drowning myself, Jared, in my river metaphor here.
You caught the wave.
Yes.
And you were crushed underneath it. No, I mean, I think that sums it up pretty well. Not much else to chip in on that. It was really just kind of the same thing happened a number of times. After the 50th minute when Blanco did go out, I agree. I think it gave them license to sit deep a bit more. They didn't have much in the way of creativity, nor did they need it. And again, that kind of played to their benefit, being able to sit in the shell against the Rapids, who couldn't pick the lock.
And what do you guys think really happened in the second half then? I mean, and you guys have probably covered it already, but from that dominant 30 minutes to then a much more even game. And I thought the chances kind of dissipated. I mean, you have a great save on the line from the Rapids. I mean, really, the Timbers started to create a bit more.
Yeah, I think some of that was certainly Portland's response. I have to imagine that Giovanni Savarese was not too happy with the halftime performance, so maybe he lights up his team and everything. Yeah. I assume the leaders in Portland's locker room were also dealing with that as well, but I think it's, unless you're Manchester City, playing in an FA Cup game against a League One team, you can't expect that level. As good as the Rapids looked and everything, what they did in that opening 20 minutes, that wasn't going to happen for 90 minutes or 120 minutes.
That's
so
right.
They let off, and look, were they, to start the half and everything, were they 90% of where they were in the first half? Absolutely, but that 10% was just enough space for Portland to manage it and everything, which is why for me, just when you have a team under the cosh, when you're dealing with that, you really need to bury one of those chances, and that's where in 3 months, in 2 months' time, Jared, when I'm having a nightmare about this game before the home opener next year, the game that is going to have me waking up in hot sweats and screaming is probably going to be that Baji header, just personally.
Yeah, and they had a number of opportunities as well. I can think of at least in the 83rd minute or so, Chara was wide open on the back post. So, it wasn't necessarily that it was completely against the run of play. The second half, for sure. Well, I think what was most frustrating from my perspective was the lack of change in the Rapids. We played well in the first half in so much as we had the stats in our favor, but we didn't have that all-important first goal. Yeah. So without an opener, you had to come out with a little bit of a different plan, a change of tact, maybe a different idea. We went back with what we started with, and it continued not to work. And unfortunately, I felt even when the subs came on, it never really changed the dynamic, and we didn't come out with an established kind of plan of attack to put the ball in the back of the net.
And I want to expand on a few of these just before we move on from the turning point. Why not the missed penalty as a turning point?
I mean, I think I get what you're doing here, Dre, but it's a bit of a cop out in terms of I think, Jared, you might have said this on the C38 podcast and everything of, it's a playoff game. You're not going to leave it up to the refs or anything. I think there are a number of reasons why the Colorado Rapids did not win that game. For me, I think it was Ted Unkel who was the head official.
Yes.
Who's a ref that I normally like. MLS Twitter notoriously hates all of the refs and think they're all biased against them.
So unique to MLS fans, believe
yes,
it or not.
Yeah,
no other league
No,
is
I mean,
like that.
I mean,
Don't look at Italy.
Yeah, if MLS could just tell me what games every single year Kevin Stott is reffing the Rapids game, I can just know to not show up to those matches at all. But so,
that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think there are a number of reasons why the Rapids did not win that game. For me, I think that being a missed call or being a 50-50 call that came up Timbers was one of them. Kay has the ball, it's further away from him towards his left leg. Chara goes in, there's clearly contact. I asked Jack Price about it in the post-game media availability. He said looked pretty clear to him. The ref had a clear view of it. Max says that there was contact. I believe him on that, but yeah, that's another thing. But there's a number of things that the Rapids should look into in terms of evaluating this performance, and I think it's an easy cop-out or blame game to simply just say, oh, you didn't get a penalty and everything. Maybe a little bit of a shout for a handball for the Timbers, though I'm not sure that there was one. Some ticky-tack fouls and everything, but I still think the Rapids did enough through 35 minutes to be up 1-0, independent of not getting a pen.
Completely agree, and from a non-biased perspective, which I certainly am biased towards the Rapids, of course. But looking at it a week later, I would have been, if I'm a Timbers fan, very hard done by the game hinging on that. And ultimately, as a fan of the game, you hate to see a game decided by a referee decision, which it almost certainly would have at that point. So, I feel like it was the right call, all in all.
I don't love penalties where the player with the ball being fouled has his back to the goal, which is essentially. And so even though there's contact, I get it. We're going to get into more of this game with a fun segment we're calling Flop or Card. Yeah, you hear? Look at this. That's the buffest I've ever looked. It's a card or flop. There you go.
Look like Ed Hockley.
I really do. It's outstanding.
Yeah,
stuff.
and there's the red card for Dyron Esprit as well.
Yeah. It's. I've got big like Swedish ref at the World Cup vibes there. I love it. So yeah, I'm gonna come with some hard statements, and you guys can tell me if I'm worthy of a card or if I'm merely just flopping and wasn't touched at all. And I'm gonna start with Frazier, Robin Frazier, arguably the best coach in the MLS this season, got every substitution wrong in the second half. Card or flop?
Is card the correct answer, or is that a flop saying?
You flop, you're calling BS. Card, you're saying
Okay.
that's a legit foul.
I think the card is noteworthy because of when they were made. Now, the section 117 where you have the rowdiest fans, there was audibly 65 minutes in a chant for Barros.
Yeah,
you're talking about arguably the team's best player, the team's leading scorer, in a game that there is no tomorrow. So the fact that he only got in, I believe in the 72nd minute, somewhere with around 20 minutes to play, feels like a very yes. I think you were assailed there.
All right.
I guess if I can disagree, Dre, I'll
Please
call it a
do.
foul, but it's not it doesn't warrant a card for me
Great,
personally.
great.
I've got the stats up right now, so I guess to provide for that, folks, it was Eunice Nomley in the 66th minute, then a double sub on the 75th, Lewis in for Bassett, Barros in for Baji, for like in both of those cases for me, and then the final sub came in the 82nd minute, Brian Galvan on for Mark Anthony K. I guess my bigger issue with this, Andre, was just that there wasn't a significant change in formation or just in what the Rapids were doing. It was still get the ball into Acosta, get the ball into Rosenberry, cross the ball and everything. There wasn't, I can count maybe 3 times in those 15 minutes plus stoppage time that Barrios had where, he was actually, started centrally, made a run out wide, and then somebody tried to get him the ball and everything. I mean, Jared, we've seen in 10-minute instances where Barrios does that 5-6 I don't have an issue with any of the individual substitutions. I would have done them maybe just a little bit earlier. I can understand where Fraser's probably thinking, it's still a close game. Maybe it goes to extra time. If I wait 5 extra minutes, then that's 5 more minutes that the Timbers on short rest at altitude are tired for, 115th minute for a Barros who's 5-10 minutes fresher and everything. But just make the subs when you make the subs, fine. Bring off the players who you bring off, add the players who you add, but then to not change the actual style of play and everything. You're simply just getting a round peg instead of a triangle peg to fit into a square hole.
Which I think might be a symptom of depth as well.
Yes.
We've bemoaned this again all season long, where the Rapids have lacked a bit of offensive identity. We've also lacked a surefire starting 11, where we don't. Yeah. I don't think anyone was ever confident in being able to say, I know who the best 11 is on the field. I don't think Robin knew on the day. So the lack of trying anything different is a little bit unsurprising, because we pretty much kind of ran out the same way with different players a number of different times, and it just didn't come together.
I only say that because I thought midfield and attack lost a bit of their structure with the subs. I thought Rubio was basically inexistent on the ball, but off the ball was very helpful, playing off Baji, and losing him lost kind of the structure. And I thought the midfield kind of came apart and really opened up their ability to have more possession.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes into Andre too. I think the fact that the Timbers, perfect lead in here, as the Rapids as Portland had to make a transition in the 52nd minute, and the Rapids didn't actually adjust until the 75th, which leads us to
losing Blanco was actually a blessing for the Timbers. I'll get my second take in. Am I crazy? Flopper or card? You start us off, man.
I think it's a card. I think as I said, it's a little more nuanced, where it simplified the game plan and everything, and it also made where there was really only one way in which the Timbers were actually going to score. But I think as soon as they knew that Blanco was out, it's like we've been here before. Like, as soon as that went into that, like, the Timbers were almost protecting a lead to go to 90 minutes and then reevaluate and everything. But then they knew, we're just going to focus on defense right now, and then the only time we're focusing on offense is when we have a set piece. So yes, for me, it's a card.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to we're going to disagree on all these. Yeah. No, I'm going to call it a flop, because given the same situation without the result, without knowing the result, if you take their best player off the 52nd minute and they have that much less of goal threat on the field, I think I take it and play on. So, I think that in hindsight, yes, it kind of collected them. They played a more defensive style. They were able to take their chance in the end. But I don't think losing your best player at that stage in a game is ever necessarily a surefire good thing for your team.
It's a very counterintuitive take. I give you that. You do wonder, should they have taken more risk when Spanko went out? Should they have gotten more aggressive? Because it almost seemed like they took their step off the gas, did the opposite.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think as soon as let's confirm. So Blanco comes out in the 52nd minute, and then they make another sub in the 66th. Like, the Rapids didn't adjust to what Portland was doing until they brought on Barros and Galvan. And as Jared and I can both attest to, this team's fluidity and their flexibility, they could have made that adjustment without making any substitutions.
Yes.
They could have made it with the substitutions as well. But you could argue the Rapids didn't actually adjust what they were doing until Portland scored. And I think that further Fraser set the team up well to begin with, and I think the fact that they didn't score and they didn't have a plan and they didn't adjust, I would argue that Giovanni Savarese in the final 30 minutes was able to outcoach Robin Fraser.
Yeah. Well put. I think the evidence speaks for itself. How about this take? I don't believe this. The loss proves the Rapids were lucky to get the number 1 seed.
Are you committing simulation here, Andre, based on there?
I am committing simulation very much.
Yeah, so
yes.
So I guess I'll call you on that. I say it's a flop. I still think
I'm rolling on the ground and smiling as I cover my face.
Okay. Right, you'll be receiving a notice from the MLS disciplinary committee after this match then.
Fine. Let's go.
So I think it's a flop. I think this team showed what they were capable of. As I said previously, just the way that they set up was good, how they adjusted was poor, but but the only reason this game ends up the way that it does is because they played the exact opponent that was set up to deal with the circumstances as they had. I think if RSL or Vancouver is in this situation, I don't think that happens. They're not as quality enough. The Rapids find a way to score. They find a way to get a clean sheet. If they play against Sporting Kansas City or Seattle, because of the way the opponent sets up, would have only made it better once Galvan or Barros subs in and everything. They played styles make fights, and they played the one guy who could actually take advantage of their weaknesses when they were only operating at 85%.
Here we agree. I think this is a dire flop. The Rapids absolutely, we deserve the number 1 seed because and any amount of luck, it comes down to the same amount of luck that every team has in any given season. And when you decide a Western Conference seeding by a matter of 2 points between the top 3 teams, certainly we had some fortune go our way. I would say things that were lucky about this season. There weren't very many opportunities for us to complain about officiating where it dropped points. We didn't have very many injuries, barring Nomley, who we learned to live without very early in the season. Not having a DP doesn't make the season any easier.
For the greater casuals, the one DP on the roster, which kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal. But at the same time, barring that long-term injury, we stayed majority healthy. So in that matter, I think that we were a bit lucky as far as breaks going our way that sometimes don't. But I absolutely think we deserve that number 1 seed. So I'll say, get up, son. You got to play on.
So I mean, by this logic, then should we not take the supporter shield away from the New England Revolution and give it to NYCFC? By this logic, RSL is a great juggernaut, and Portland are pretenders as well. Exactly. So I think where I think there's some nuance here, Andre, that I think is unfortunate is that Jared, we've seen this just the national media who looks at the Rapids, looks at the budget, doesn't see a de facto game winner and everything, sees that Nomley missed 4 months and says, by definition, therefore, the Rapids are a paper tiger. And fairly or unfairly, this result will galvanize or validate that cognitive dissonance from those people where it's, see, they couldn't even beat the Portland Timbers at home. They couldn't even score a goal. They're once again one and done in the playoffs. Therefore, the Rapids shouldn't be taken seriously. In spite of all the other evidence that we have that, it's simply validating the notion they have about this team because of the way ownership is set up, the way that they spend, rather than the actual results, as opposed to seeing the nuance of, no, there's something to what Brentford is doing in the Premier League right now. There's nuance and value in what the A's have done, and obviously, I think the big disappointment for us is the Rapids are this great experiment of, we don't have a Chad Marshall theorem, we don't have a Hani Mukhtar, an MVP. Can you still be a consistent playoff team, and can you win MLS Cup with that? This is simply one data point that proves that there's complications to that, but there's a bunch of people who've only been watching at surface level, never believed going into decision day the Rapids were going to win Western Conference, still said, but are they going to do it in the playoffs? And then are going to say, I'm right.
100%.
I think it reinforces the narrative, and correctly so, ultimately, because we do see ourselves as the underdog, and by seeing ourselves as that small market underdog, you have to embrace that role. You're not going to be given respect without taking it by going out again early in the first round. Leicester, if they would have finished second in their championship season, they would never have been remembered as the fantastic team they were. This year, for me, the Rapids earn no hero points. There's nobody's statue is any closer to being built because we had a tremendous regular season. So ultimately, it does come down to proving the haters wrong by winning the big matches.
And in that, this was a massive opportunity that ultimately, or it was a fantastic opportunity that was ultimately squandered in many ways.
100%. And that the point you guys both made, I think every other game of the MLS playoffs proves right. It's one game. It's one game in the beautiful game where, you can dominate a game like the Rapids did for long stretches and not come out as a winner, come out goalless. Yes. So there you go. Let's close this out. Card or flop. The Rapids should be even better next year. Again, DP out most of the year. Young team, built long term. All the evidence for a casual.
A little reference
for easy. Yes.
A little reference for the folks that follow, especially Wanners. we're going to stir the pot a
There
little
you
bit
go.
because
Yeah,
I have a
yeah.
feeling we may have a DP play a few more minutes next year. I don't necessarily know who that DP may be, but certainly given the budgetary rules of MLS, one would imagine that we could use a little bit of the cash allotted to reinforce and to bring in a difference-making player who can decide points for us. I will go ahead and say, yes, absolutely, we should and will be better in 22 than 21, and that's a huge jump because this was such a fantastic season.
Yeah.
I guess I view this, Andre, from the perspective of, is the team going to, are they going to compete to be at the top of the Western Conference? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say flop, or I guess I'm putting my finger to my ear asking for some help from VAR in this situation. I think there's a good question who the Rapids sell to Europe in January. There's been a lot of talk about Cole Bassett. I've been more on I think the more likely one to move there is Austin Trusty. Jared brought up, does the loss of one of those young players and then that transfer fee going into funding a DP is a good question as well. But we know Seattle's not going to sit pat. They had a lot of injuries. They're going to be better this year. The LA Galaxy aren't going to sit pat. That being said, if you told me right now the Rapids are finish fourth in the Western Conference and have a home playoff seed, I'd absolutely take it. I guess where you have a point is the Rapids are continuing to move towards a sustainable model where as long as Porrick Smith is cooking in the kitchen and then Robin Fraser's there as well, this team is going to move in terms of direction of being sustainable and consistently competitive. I do not know that the Rapids are going to win the Western Conference next year, and I think there's a number of variables to play in that. And in general, if you had me bet right now, like we said about MLS in general, I would not make that bet.
Right. I mean, I try to explain to some of my friends it's at best structured like a college team where you have a 2-3 year window, but things are constantly evolving. We're part of a much bigger player pool here, so things are going to be moving in and out in the global game like that. I loved hearing both your answers because I think to some extent improving the highest point total in club history, no small feat. Yeah. But at the same time, the bases are all there. The foundation is there to go only one direction, but up. All right. I enjoyed that tremendously. Thank you for indulging me. That was lots of fun. Let's get into, with the season sadly over, we're moving past that game into some of your favorite moments, key games, best goals of the season, maybe even give out an award. So, Matt, why don't you start us off? Your favorite moment of the year?
Favorite moment of the year? I mean, it'd have to be decision day. I wouldn't even say the game itself,
Incredible.
but I think I mentioned this on the pod. I think I wrote about this in my article. I probably mentioned this, when we did the preview pod show and everything of just I remember, like, this is my moment that just in my brain, like, hang it in the Louvre of, I guess in GIF form mainly, of the Rapids players huddling around. There was an assistant coach. I think it was Chris Little. I'm not sure. Looking at his phone and everything, refreshing to see when Seattle and Vancouver would go full time and everything. And then you see Trusty turn around and he fist pumps. Jonathan Lewis jumps in the air, throws a water ball in the air, and there was kind of an emotional, like, I don't know how you felt, Jared, in 117 of like, there was like a ripple out of like, everybody just immediately knew, like, there's a good disturbance in the force. I think the Rapids just won the Western Conference. And then at that point, it was a party and everything. So that moment emotionally for me, even if maybe I'm being hyperbolic or maybe just imagining it in my head and everything, that's what emotionally I will remember as the best high of this year.
I mean, how can you beat that?
You took a pretty good one.
Yeah, no kidding.
That tremendous Thanksgiving Day win would have been a great way to top it off. But for me, one of my favorite moments this season was the early season game where we went down 2-0 against Minnesota, battled back with 3 goals in the second half. Something about that game, something about the energy in 117 and amongst the team itself made me think something might be different this year. We may have a little bit of bottle and a little bit of resolve that we haven't seen in the years past. So that was an early tipping point. Certainly not quite as, I mean, that was a more reserved high than the complete euphoria of decision day. But for me, that was where I realized, we've got a good team on our hands.
Love that. What about best goal?
You want to go first, Jared?
All my moments are against Minnesota, actually. So I've got there's a goal from Brian Galvan, who cut in from the right-hand side onto his left foot, bent it around some defenders from Minnesota off the post. And I realized that Brian Galvan was going to be that kind of guy. He can be a take-on guy, can be an attacking presence.
Yeah.
I love that goal. And I feel like all the other goals, when I look back, I mean, how often can you say Jack Price to Danny Wilson in the box on a corner? So that Galvan goal is my favorite.
I'd have to go, I guess, ironically now, the second goal that the Rapids scored in their 2-2 draw at Portland Timbers up a man, where Barros kind of similarly goes, but as opposed to cutting inside, catches to the touchline, and then just kind of, I guess maybe where Jared's is a little bit better is I'm pretty sure Galvan hits that ball, and as soon as he leaves his foot, he's like, this is in the back of the net. Yeah. I'm already planning my celebration. Barros chips it into the box, just like, I hope somebody's there at the back post, and it ends up going off the crossbar, off the far side post, and then into the net and everything. And ironically, he might have been the last person to realize that it was over the line. So I picked it because just emotionally I watched that, and I watched it in real time. I've watched the replay of it at least 12 times. I still don't know how it happened. My brain can still not comprehend that Barros struck the ball from where he did on the field and it ended up in the back of the net. Maybe a little bit disvalued because it was unintentional, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure.
Perhaps.
I've maybe seen like 3 goals like that in 25 years of watching soccer. That would be my pick as well. Who's your MVP for the season?
Jack Price. Jack Price was kind of the heartbeat all season long, kind of the metronome in the middle. Certainly a case to be made for other players, the guy between the sticks and the leading goal scorer as well. But for me, Captain Jack. And I feel like we may see an extension to his stay in Colorado if all goes well.
I think the only other one that you could possibly have an argument would be Michael Barros, because he's a new player. Everything that he did to revolutionize what this team did on the counterattack and everything. 8 goals, 6 assists, if I'm remembering that stat right, Jared. But I'd have to go with Captain Jack as well. He's the emotional leader of this team. This team, I think, first and foremost, is Robin Fraser's personality and aura on the field, and I think second most Jack Price. He's the coach on the field. Everything that he's done from a leadership standpoint, what he does on set pieces as a two-way, he's the foundation. He is the load-bearing pillar of this team and everything. So I'd have to go for him. I could hear people on Twitter or in the chat right now say Barros, and I think there's an argument to be made there.
Yeah, I mean, on your podcast, Porrig Smith saying the same thing. Like Jack Price won 6 in a row of the team of the in-house 4 MVPs.
4.
Yeah, 4. Thank you.
I think the only other name to be
hyperbole
mentioned
today, Matt.
The only other name to be mentioned there, I think he'd be hard done by not to mention, is the clean sheet leader in MLS, William Yarbrough.
I was going to say
a revelation between the posts, a fantastic player that I don't think got really any positive press when he came in. It's like, who is this guy? He seemed like a castaway from Mexico, and we don't know much about him. Turned out to be one of the signings of the season.
Yes, but Jared, I do have to point out that the MLS media didn't have him as a finalist for goalkeeper of the year, and therefore your argument is invalid because MLS ignores the Colorado Rapids.
Clearly undeserving.
And you could go, keeper, best defender. We've talked a lot about Trusty. And Barrios certainly as the representative of the attack. But yeah, I think Jack Price just a little. I do think there's some real validity to the Yarbrough candidacy, though, for MVP.
Yes, we have in all of our conversations, and certainly in the C38 South lot and everything, we've sung those praises of all 3 of those players. Right. They all deserve to go into the offseason very proud for what they've accomplished and with high and deserved expectations for 2022.
Absolutely. Let's get into what's next coming down the line. Really just CONCACAF Champions League as the MLS season isn't even over, and domestic cups and what have you will be figured out scheduling down the line. But we do know they'll at least be in in the Champions League and what that schedule looks like now.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, Andre, I think for a lot of people who are watching this and are new to the Rapids, is the MLS offseason is probably the most complicated of the domestic sports that we have here in the U.S. We've yet to get the news on what the Rapids are doing in terms of team options for 2022. We did get some news today. Michael Barros, who we just mentioned, got a contract extension, and there's a team option as well for 2023. I sense that there might be a few more conversations in there. Jared mentioned Jack Price, maybe on Austin Trusty, Kellen Acosta getting a new deal, I think certainly could be possible as well. But so I think there's some moves to make to lock up their core. Porrick Smith is definitely in the kitchen right now, and there's confidence from that front. And then I think the next big thing we're waiting for is that December 13th, the Monday after MLS Cup, in which we'll get the half-day training window. I don't anticipate the club being too busy in that. And then after that, obviously, there's the expansion draft where there's a chance that they could lose a player there. But then, obviously, December 15th, I think it is, when we get the draw. The Rapids are in Pot 1, and they'll be playing a team from Pot 2. And then we'll know where Jared and I are going for our away day in mid-February as well, hopefully somewhere warm. So looking forward to that, obviously. Robin Fraser has a lot of experience in CCL from his time in Toronto and everything. Right. It's going to be an interesting test of depth. We've also seen this competition kind of swallow up teams with injuries. So something that I don't know about you, Jared, I'm kind of leery of just can we get to March 1 and have, not a bunch of injuries that potentially undoes the start of the year?
Amen. And, we've got one warm away day booked already on February 26th. I'll still be eating turkey sandwiches from last week by the time the Rapids play another league game, because it's February 26th is the first game on the road. A couple of things to look forward to in the offseason for me. I would love to see that Robin Fraser contract news break, and I have a feeling that this is a guy who very well deservingly is probably going to be amongst the highest paid coaches in the league, and hopefully we lock him up for a good long time. One player that we talked about just briefly today that I would be surprised to see back next year is Eunice Namley, our DP, who he played very well, I would say, in the time that we got to see him. Unfortunately, his time got
pretty
cut
limited.
all too short due to injury, so bad break, and wish him the best contractually, because he's on pretty big money now, and I think he'll struggle to find that level of contract. But unless it's a significantly reduced deal, I have a hard time seeing him back in Commerce City.
Jared, that opening game at LAFC, is Cole Bassett still a member of the Colorado Rapids for you?
Not bad.
That was the question. Oh, are you thinking?
What was the question again there? Sorry.
So the first game against LAFC, is Cole Bassett still a member of the Rapids, or does he leave in January?
It's a great question. I really think that he had a great opportunity with Benfica, and so hard to say where his loyalties lie. He'll always be a Rapid, of course, but I think he may still see some upside in continuing to be a staple in this team. He certainly brings something to the attack that we don't necessarily have coming from other central midfielders, as far as that drive into the box, take on ability. I would love to see him in Burgundy in February and beyond, but he certainly has the potential to go to Europe as well.
Yeah, I think the thing for him is probably what's the right fit and everything. I don't think, we talked about this with Sam Vines leaving and everything. It was about, does the club get the right transfer fee and everything? They ultimately did with the $2 million and then the 50% sell on. Is it the right setup? There was an opening at left back. It was a soft landing spot for Sam Vines. I don't know that with the timing and everything, Benfica in August would have been a soft landing spot for Cole Bassett.
Right.
I think that's the question. The other big one for me is Austin Trusty. I think he's more of a finished product than you're in getting Cole Bassett from a European club. You're maybe still buying into potential. I think for where Austin Trusty is in his career and his age, he's more of a finished product. At that point, I think it comes down to money. I think somebody picks up the phone and calls Porrick Smith and say, hey, here's $6 million, the same deal that Mark McKenzie moved. I think at that point, it's a matter of, hey, Austin, here's the club and everything. Unless this is a really bad fit for you, you're moving on. And I would gladly... It would be sad for me to see him go, Jared, because of how good he was this year and how much it was a vindication of him, given how 2020 didn't work out for Austin Trusty. But if you're telling me, we could promote a court four to get another center back and everything, and then take $6 million and roll that straight into a transfer fee for somebody who's not Eunice Namley as a DP, that's a trade that I'd be willing to make.
Yeah, certainly. I think Trusty and Bassett are the two that we have to keep an eye on. I think every morning I'll wake up and look at Twitter with just that little bit of fear, like is today the day that we find out one of them is gone, and that will set in full force in January when the European window opens.
Yep, silly season is upon us.
If you had to guess, Cole still on the Rapids?
Yes, I say. I think if he does move, I don't think it'll be in January. I think if he starts and plays well, then I think there's an opportunity for him to move in the summer. I think one thing that we haven't talked about, Andre, that I think is really interesting is there's going to be a World Cup next year, and for the first time ever, it's going to be a World Cup at the end of an MLS season. So does Cole Bassett play really, really well at the end of that season, and then have the primary transfer window for MLS, and then obviously Lee's coming back in Europe, almost having it's almost a clausura and an apertura for a lot of the European clubs and everything. Think, the Rapid season will be done in November. Maybe they move the transfer window up to right to the end of the World Cup. Do they make a move for somebody? And so in that, I think next year is a pivotal point for Cole Bassett. If he achieves his potential, then I think many doors will open up for him in Europe at some point. If not, then I think it could be more about, what's a good fit? Am I comfortable?
Right.
Rather than the immediate financial opportunities. Whereas I think next year is going to be the year for Kellen Acosta.
Interesting. What I love about how you framed the whole dilemma for Cole and some of the factors you were mentioning, Jarrett, is, well, the January transfer window is always a shit show. There's no automatic fits there. You're taking massive risks. And then Cole, let's face it, he doesn't have a defined role just yet. Tough to go to a top 8 league in Europe while you're still trying to find your position and where you fit best. So those would be some positive attributes in the Rapids defense. What area would you like to see them address more in the transfer market this offseason? And a dream signing, if you have one. Let's start with you, Jared.
Yeah, so we've all opined many years about the magical number 9 that will fix everything. For me, I think that Barros plays extremely well on the right. He takes players on extremely well. To quote Herbert Chapman, this is an old Arsenal reference. He said he coached his wingers very simply: go to the front post and pass. If you do that from both sides well, you're going to win most of your games. The problem that we had is we had a dire lack of production from the left side of our attacking midfield, a place that I think we thought would be a strength going into the season. So I would love to see us sign a complimentary winger for Barrios. Dream signing for me, though, if we're going to go into dream territory, I will go number 9, a European player that I think would bring the grit, the size, the goal-scoring ability that the Rapids have lacked. Marko Arnautovic.
The Austrian striker at Bologna right now. Very intriguing. He's a bad man. I wonder, a little shaky in that locker room, but very intriguing.
Yeah, I think the question for me, Andre, is, I think if we looked back, I think somewhere in the back of Robin Fraser's head this time last year was, we've got 3 really good center backs. We should move to a back 3. How do we do that while still maintaining our principles and everything? And I think the ethereal setup of the, limit as Robin Fraser with the Rapids goes to infinity of, here's our style of play, here's our set thing, and then me and Jared maybe actually knowing who the best 11 is, would be in a 3-4-2-1. And then kind of more of that interior, not actual central like number 10 and everything, but one of the more fluid, can go out a little bit wide, fill that role that Jared was kind of talking about, but somebody who can also be a little bit central for that. So if you told me right now, I'm only getting obviously I think the 2 obvious, let's sign 2 DPs, a number 10 and a number 9. And if you're telling me I can't have the number 9, if I was going to pick a number 10, it was going to have to be somebody in that mold. So kind of maybe what Gio Reyna has been increasingly at Dortmund. It will not be Gio Reyna, folks.
It won't be Gio Reyna. What? No, come on. I want Gio now.
The 50 million pound transfer kitty that we've given over to Pollard.
Yes.
You're saying we're not getting that for Austin Trusty? Damn it all.
So I think I think that would be the mold of player who I want as well. One person who we talked about before we hit the record button. If there's somebody within MLS to continue the Rapids being revenged of the distressed assets FC would be Robert Barrick, who is a striker from Chicago Fire. The Fire completely overhauling and chosen not to pick up his team option. There's a thing called the re-entry draft, folks, where players who have team options for the next season because MLS single entity are eligible to be picked up by other teams within MLS. So the Rapids could pick that up. No transfer fee at all associated with that. They'd already know the contract details, and then potentially be a secondary DP and then not spend a transfer fee and bring in somebody else. That would be an option for somebody with a proven pedigree of scoring goals and everything. And I'd be willing to bet money right now Robert Barrick would score more goals than any current Rapids player would on the Rapids next year, and would be a nice little target for Michael Barros at that. And if we're talking about the get to the front post and pass and everything, I'd rather have him passing to Robert Barrick than Diego Rubio.
And adding to the feasibility is be cheap.
100%, right? And a guy who was not so cheap not too long ago. So another discount. Nothing sounds more Porrig Smith Island of Misfit Toys than what you just described. Beautiful. Well, I instantly want to revert to my roots and turn this into a transfer pod for the next hour. We are not doing that. We truly, in Italy, we talk more about the transfer window than any soccer that's actually played. It's just that much fun. Let's get into some bets. We have some more playoffs ahead, and I know you, Matt, see some real value in this Timbers RSL semi here.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it pains me as much to say this out loud, Jared, but I think the obvious bet there is to go with RSL. You're going to have Portland as a home team. There's going to be major injuries, and just with the nature of the line, and then also maybe people who are interested in sports betting but not as well known about, don't know as much about MLS will see, Portland's the home team. They're the higher seed. They're the better regular season team. That inflates it, which also means more juice for the lower seeded team and everything. Also, Pablo Mastroeni and RSL are absolutely playing with house money. They have massively, as soon as they didn't get destroyed by Seattle, they were immediately playing with house money. They're going to go in and be absolutely fearless. This is going to be 90 minutes of S-housery. And Jared, I'm absolutely dreading watching it regardless of what bet I place on this game.
Oh, it's going to be painful.
Yeah, it seems like the type of game that could very easily go 120 minutes scoreless, which we've seen RSL do already in the playoffs. Again, pains me to say that RSL is going to win this match because they face the Timbers so heavily depleted. Heavy fixture schedule, no Asprilla because of the idiot red card at the end of the Rapids match. More than likely no Blanco because the injury did look to be pretty serious for him to go out at that stage. So, Portland is going to be lacking some of their guns. I hate to say this, but as a gambler, you always have to bet with your head, not your heart. RSL to advance.
RSL to advance, you're getting really nice value.
I
plus
guess
160.
I guess the one benefit that we have there, Jared, is there's two scenarios. Either you and I win a lot of money, or RSL doesn't win MLS Cup.
Win-win.
That's a win-win.
It's called an emotional hedge right there. And out east, we have the Union taking on NYCFC. That was a crazy game, NYCFC taking on the Revs. Glad I didn't bet on, well, I did, but glad I didn't double down on the Revs a couple different times, though that was my instinct. Because there you go. Both top seeds out. One game, done. That's how it is.
Yeah, no, I think it's a tough one. I think the more juice is going to be on NYCFC as the away team. Obviously, they're going to be shorthanded because of some injuries at the back line, and then obviously Tati Castellanos' red card that has him suspended. So Philadelphia, I'm mixing up my P teams. Is the obvious selection to go there, but I'd be more interested in the prop bets and everything. We haven't seen Kasper Shabilko score in this playoffs, and so if you're looking at some injuries on the back line, heavy legs for an Alexander Callens and a Maxine Chanot, Kasper, the friendly striker. If I had to pick any bet right now, I'd say Shabilko score anytime would be mine.
Love that.
Yeah, I like it as well. This Philadelphia team, I think they didn't quite live up to expectations after a high-flying season last year, but they've kind of grown into themselves. I will always root against NYCFC because of the plastic nature of the City Football Group. So, brotherly love to Philly, please. You are our only hope. Don't let Salt Lake win this thing.
The goalie matchup you're going with on both sides, and I love that. Philly, RSL, it's the better goalie. That's what matters in this sport. I side with both of you. You hear any picks to give out? Just a lot of sadness. Not on a day like this when I get to hang out with these two. This has been stellar. Thank you all. I see you very active in the chat. Love to see that. Thank you all for tuning in. We will be continuing this Rapids ride on DNVR. We'll take a break here for the offseason. We'll tune in on some big moments, and we hope to have some now familiar faces back again very soon. So thank you, fellas. It's been a true pleasure, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Jay.
We will be back soon.
Yeah.